Good morning and thank you for joining us on Africa This Morning. It is the 23rd of April 2014. Let's start the bulletin with a look at the top stories.
Conflict in South Sudan. Rebels deny killing hundreds of civilians in the South Sudanese oil-producing town of Bentiu. Central African Republic crisis. Muslim women and children flee from capital Bangui under the protection of the French military.
Their recommendations are one-sided because I just saw them in my office.
Fighting corruption in Kenya. Kenya Revenue Authority to take over collection of social security contributions in a move aimed at curbing alleged graft.
Rebels in South Sudan have denied a UN report that they killed hundreds of civilians after taking control of the oil hub Bentiu last week. The UN said that civilians were killed along ethnic lines at a mosque, a church, and a hospital.
The United Nations had claimed Monday that rebels slaughtered hundreds of civilians when they seized the South Sudan oil hub of Bentiu, hunting down men, women and children who had sought refuge in a hospital, mosque and Catholic church. The UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan said that its human rights investigators confirmed that rebels searched a number of places where hundreds of South Sudanese and foreign civilians had taken refuge and killed hundreds of the civilians after determining their ethnicity or nationality. A rebel leader, however, claimed that their forces were not responsible for killing civilians in Bentiu and instead blamed government troops. UN peacekeepers rescued more than 500 civilians from Bentiu Hospital and other places and escorted thousands more as they walked to the UN base. The UN said it is currently protecting more than 12,000 civilians at its Bentiu base. Around the country, the United Nations is protecting tens of thousands of civilians who have sought refuge at its bases. The warring parties in South Sudan agreed to a cessation of hostilities in January, but fighting has continued in parts of South Sudan, which seceded from Sudan in 2011 under an agreement to end decades of war.
As a new wave of sectarian violence erupts in the Central African Republic, about 100 Muslim women and children have fled the capital Bangui under the protection of the French military.
Muslims in Central African Republic once again are fleeing. About 100 mostly women and children left the capital Bangui Monday, taking only what they could carry. They fear attacks from the Christian anti-Balaka militia. While this group is destined for bombardee in the country's center, others could very well leave the country altogether. Almost 200,000 have fled the country since December, according to the UN, and another 160,000 are expected to flee this year. A group of French troops escorted the refugees, but some anti-Balaka want to see all Muslims leave.
We don't want Muslims to stay in Bambari or Bria. They should leave directly for Chad. That's what we want.
As the convoys traveled through the country, there was no guarantee that these Muslims could return. So far, the 6,000 African and 2,000 French troops already there have failed to stop the violence.
If the country calms down, I will return to Bangui, but if the country doesn't calm down, I will stay in Bambari.
Another 12,000 troops will be deployed to the country in September as part of a UN peacekeeping mission.
And back to Kenya, barely a week after the Ombudsman's office called on the anti-graft agency to investigate the controversial Tasia 2 housing project, Labour Minister Kazungu Kambi has initiated several measures to deal with the alleged graft at the National Social Security Fund. He says NSSF contributions will now be collected by the Kenya Revenue Authority to ensure that there is accountability in the management of the funds. Annette Akisa with the report.
Labour Cabinet Secretary Kazungu Kambi suspended the controversial 5 billion shillings Tarsier project and directed the board to evaluate the tender awarded to a Chinese company. The suspension will give the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission time to conclude their audit. The Cabinet Secretary says he's restructuring the management board and bring in the Kenya Revenue Authority to collect contributions.
Collection has also been a challenge. And I'm happy to tell you that in the next 2 months, collection will be done by Kenya Revenue Authority. We have outsourced that service to seal the loopholes which were there.
The country's ombudsman also called on the Anti-Corruption Commission to institute investigations into the conduct of the NSSF Chief Executive Officer as well as 4 members of the board, saying they abused power in regard to approval of the controversial project. Kambi is not happy with the verdict.
Their recommendations are one-sided because I just saw them in my office. They have not managed to also to get what it is from us than from one person who is a board member, because I don't look at Atoli as a go-to. I look at him as a NSSF board member. So he's still part and parcel of NSSF.
On the looming battle between members of the Public Sector Trade Unions Federation and the Central Organization of Trade Unions on who to organize Labor Day celebrations,
going to involve both Pusetu and Kotu, because this country belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to one trade union. Otherwise, I'll also be failing as a cabinet secretary. So basically, they're worried about the Labor Day. But I clearly told him that the Labor Day belongs to the workers, the employers, and the government, who are all these Kenyans. Because in other words, the Labor Day belongs to Kenyans. It doesn't belong to the Ministry of Labor.
Kotu has reportedly booked all venues in a bid to block Pusetu, and the Cabinet Secretary wants the 2 unions to work together. Annette Akisa, Ebru Africa News.
To energy matters in the country, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has invited Qatari investors to partner with the Jubilee government in the exploration of oil and the generation of natural gas in the country. The president, who is in Qatar, said the Jubilee government has prioritized the provision of energy as a key driver of growth envisioned in Vision 2030 and has developed a medium-term strategy for the production of 5,000 megawatts of power by 2016, targeting a rich mix of energy sources, among which green energy is prominent.
Thank you very much. We're happy to be here. Yes.
President Uhuru Kenyatta also said Kenya wants the support of Qatar in energy generation, especially in the supply of petroleum oil and LNG gas, to address the energy deficit in the country. He noted that Kenya Pipeline had already signed a non-disclosure agreement with Qatar Gas to start negotiations on the supply of 1 million metric tons per annum of LNG to Kenya Power to power the 700-megawatt gas plant in the port city of Mombasa. He said Kenya offered immense investment opportunities in the energy sector, in oil and gas exploration and development, and in power generation from gas, oil, hydro, and geothermal power. He also encouraged the Qatari business community to take advantage of the investment opportunity in Kenya in the area of infrastructure, transport, and communication. Earth Day marks the anniversary of the modern environmental movement that was started in the 70s. Even as the world gains growing interest on the impact of poor environmental practices, Kenya is yet to set concrete strategies in motion. Dr. Maurice Bolo, the director of the Seinvent Center, shares his thoughts. The UN's just completed Intergovernmental Report on Food Security and Climate Change indicated the impact of climate change on Kenya, giving a clear cost implication of global warming on the country. However, the reaction by the government is a bit slow.
We are trying to promote what we would call demand-driven kind of research. That research, for it to feed to the end use, it must be demanded or driven from the other end. So if we do not just sit as a researcher and decide, okay, I think this topic is interesting, I'm going to pursue it. Then after you pursue it, you have your technical volumes and you have your papers, and that's the end of it. When that happens, then we don't see that translation of research into policy and into practice. So what we are trying to do is to say, okay, a lot of research is going on. What data are they generating? How useful is that data to policy and into practice?
Dr. Maurice Bolo, the director of the Sinovent Center, says although food security has been at the forefront of the government's agenda, its strategy to curb the impact of global warming is wanting.
We are just finishing a study in the coffee industry, trying to look at how do we, get our farmers to move up the value chain. And a number of interesting things are coming up. If you go to Nyeri, for example, there is Othaya Coffee Farmers Cooperative Society. That what they have done in Othaya is to try and organize the farmers in a way that now they are able to have some of their activities along the value chain done in-house.
There are several challenges when it comes to translating the numbers of research to policy.
I mean, there is a lot of research going on in our institutions. Our universities, for example, have a lot of research on climate change issues. Institutions like the Kenya Agricultural Research Institute are having, programs that relate to food security, climate change, and all. The problem, in my view, has been the translation of that research into policy so that the policy can then begin to guide what we do downstream as well. That is where, in my view, we have been slow in terms of taking that up. And that is why we see this recurring cycle of food insecurity, people requiring food aid from time to time.
At the same time, the climate change agenda is not one that can be overlooked from a personal standpoint.
I think one of the things we really need to do is to begin to sensitize our people more, to know that we do have a role. At the moment, our Constitution and Vision 2030 talk about increasing our forest cover from the current, I think, about 6% to 10%. Okay, what is my role in that? What is your role in that? What is everybody's role in that? Are we planting trees? We are being advised, okay, plant a tree.
Beryl, Ooro, Ebru, Africa, Nairobi. To South Korea, the confirmed death toll from the South Korean ferry that capsized last week has reached 121 as divers recovered more bodies from the sunken ship. More than 190 passengers are still missing or presumed trapped inside the vessel.
Divers now recover bodies at a steady pace from the stricken Sewol ferry off the southwestern coast of South Korea. Two giant floats serve as markers of the sunken hull. Only 174 passengers were rescued after Wednesday's fatal accident. Hundreds, mostly school children, are still missing, presumed dead. And the death toll is continually updated. The ferry turned over and sank within 2 hours. It's not yet clear why. Divers have reached many of the cabins in the hull, although they're still trying to get into the restaurant where many of the passengers were believed to be trapped. Rescuers say they'll keep searching for now, but the cranes stand ready as the operation to bring the hull to the surface will begin in 2 days.
People do not stop pursuing their dreams because they grow old. They grow old because they stop pursuing their dreams. This is one of the memorable quotes by Nobel laureate Garcia Marquez, who died last Thursday. The Mexican and Colombian presidents paid their tribute to the writer, who was also a practicing journalist.
A colourful remembrance for adored author Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Hundreds of fans thronged outside Mexico City's Palace of Fine Arts to pay their last respects to the giant of Latin American literature. Inside, the palace was adorned with yellow flowers, the author's favourite, and musicians also performed some of his most loved pieces. The Mexican president and his Colombian counterpart gave thanks for his life.
Today, in the Palace of Fine Arts, the place of excellence and the culture of Mexico, with a heavy heart and soul, we say goodbye on behalf of more than 47 million compatriots to the greatest Colombian of all time, Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
His works, his inspiration, his example will always be with his friends and millions of people around the world. His words and his books will survive the limits of a human life. Garcia Marquez lives amongst us, in today's generations and those to come. A great man, a truly great man, whose work will stay with us.
After they spoke, thousands of yellow paper butterflies flew out of the palace and into the night. a nod to a character from his famous novel 100 Years of Solitude, who was followed by the insects. Earlier, residents of Garcia Marquez's birthplace of Aracataca in Colombia held a symbolic funeral. The writer fled Colombia in 1981 after learning that the military wanted to question him over links to left-wing guerrillas. Garcia Marquez, who was a pioneer of magical realism, died in Mexico on Thursday at the age of 87. But his books will live on in the hearts and minds of millions.
Still on the award-winning writer, the late Colombian author Gabriel Marquez, who died last Thursday, once said his hometown of Aracataca was the inspiration of the fictional world of Macondo described in his most famous work, 100 Years of Solitude. Residents of the impoverished small town close to Colombia's Caribbean coast hope that, following his death, more tourists will come to see the birthplace of one of the 20th century's greatest writers.
87 years ago, the small town of Aracataca, near Colombia's Caribbean coast, saw the birth of a child who would become one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who died recently in Mexico City, is said to have been inspired by these tropical surroundings when he wrote about Macondo, the fictional town where his masterpiece, 100 Years of Solitude, unfolds.
I came to visit the place where the Nobel laureate spent his childhood. But it's not just the Nobel laureate of Aracataca, he's universal, a person admired throughout the world, a person whose life story should be taught.
Born and raised in Aracataca, Garcia Marquez moved to Mexico in 1981, spurred by fears he would be interrogated, or worse, by the Colombian army, who suspected he had ties with the leftist M19 guerrilla group. He returned to Colombia for brief visits later in life, but considered Mexico City his home. This has left some in Aracataca with the bitter feeling that they were robbed of their hero.
There are a lot of people who feel a little hurt because everything is about Mexico, 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 and no one is talking about Aracataca. He was born here. It was the land that gave birth to him.
Aracataca has never really seen much benefit from Garcia Marquez's fame. It's a poor town where a lot of homes aren't even connected to mains water, so many bathe in the river. The train passes through its station but doesn't stop here. There's hope that following his death, renewed interest in Marquez's work will result in more tourists coming to visit. Marquez's childhood home, turned into a museum, has already seen a rise in visitor numbers.
I've
traveled to Europe, and abroad they love Gabo even more than here. I think the whole world is mourning him, and today, more than ever, tourists will want to visit the place where our only Nobel laureate was born.
As Mexico bids farewell to its adoptive son with a national tribute, Colombia, and especially Aracataca, also plan to reclaim some of the memory of their long-lost author.
It's a case of one man's curse flagging off another's fortune. For months now, California has suffered from a historic drought. The lack of water is worrying for farmers and ranchers, but for gold prospectors, it's a stroke of good fortune. With water levels low, normally inaccessible areas are now exposed, creating favorable conditions for panning the rivers.
Jack Barber has been prospecting gold in California for more than 30 years. For him, this year's record drought means business is good.
Now, because the water level is so low due to the drought, we're able to dig where we could not dig in the past, and therefore we're finding more gold.
Armed with his sieve and other equipment, it's only a few minutes before Barber makes his first find of the day.
And there it is right there. It's a real nice piece.
This 12-milligram nugget is worth around $5. These flakes could bring up to $25. In all, it allows Barber to support himself.
It can pay off quite well, especially with the price of gold right now, roughly around $1,300 an ounce.
Climatologists say California's drought could be its worst in 50 years, something that could be a result of climate change.
I would say that these conditions are consistent
with global warming. Over 10 years, since the beginning of this century, we've had very dry conditions, very warm conditions. There's never been a year when there wasn't a large part of the Southwest in drought.
With such favorable weather for prospectors, the riverbanks are attracting newcomers.
This is my first time here, so I've heard news stories that they've been finding gold here.
Even with little experience, some good instincts are already showing through.
A good miner never tells you how much gold he's got, because then you'll be coming to get his gold. Same place.
Whether they tell or not, if the drought continues, more people may feel the urge to grab a sieve and pan the rivers of Southern California.
The authorities in Pakistan's leafy affluent capital have declared war on the slums, largely populated by Christians and Afghan refugees, saying they are illegal. The authorities are, however, offering no compensation to evicted residents.
It may have not been much, but this was once Mirjan's house. Like others in this Islamabad slum, her home was pulled down on government orders.
The municipal authorities have treated us with cruelty. Poor people are living here. There are no terrorists, no robbers, and no bad people living here. They've crushed us as we are poor people.
There are more than 20 such slums in the Pakistani capital, housing mostly Christians and Afghan refugees. The shanty towns started to develop in the 1960s in the shadow of Islamabad's plush neighbourhoods. And now the authorities want to clear at least 14 of them.
These are working class populations. They are the ones who make this city run. They are the construction workers, they are the drivers, they are the cooks. In the cases of Christians, they are mostly the cleaners.
For the state, meanwhile, it's simple. The slums are illegal, the residents pay no rent, and must therefore be moved on.
We just want to introduce a new culture. They need to move to rented accommodation. There are, in the suburbs of Islamabad, you can hire rooms for up to 3,000 to 5,000 rupees a month.
5,000 rupees is worth around $50. Too big a sum for many of these people who struggle to make the equivalent of $100 a month. And they know they're powerless if the authorities come knocking on their door.
I have no Kalashnikov, no any pistol, also no firing, but peace. I think that I hope to Jesus, they never come here.
There's no compensation or rehousing plan for the slum residents, and many have been reduced to selling the bricks of their own houses to tide them over until tomorrow at least.
And with that, we come to the end of the Bulletin on Africa this morning. Join us next as we take a look at other leading stories on our social media platform segment on Trend.